A 19-year-old whose hands are always covered in grease has no place at this dinner table. You are a financial drain on this family, my father snarled. Then the heavy front door slammed shut, locking me out in the freezing winter night. Years later, I met them again in a sun-drenched, glass-walled lawyer's office on the 40th floor. My parents and sister were sitting across from me, and my name was the only one written on the final page of the will. I'm 30 years old now, and if you had told me a decade ago that I'd one day inherit my grandfather's entire industrial estate worth a jaw-dropping $5.2 million, I'd have laughed in your face. Back then, I was just trying to scrape together enough cash to rent a leaky corner of a commercial garage. I certainly never envisioned sitting in a high-rise office while the people who biologically birthed me stared at me like starving hyenas circling a fresh kill. The dark irony of it all is that my family was obsessed with perfection. My father, Richard, was a ruthless real estate developer, and my mother, Evelyn, was a prominent city councilwoman who ran her public image like a military campaign. Appearances were their religion. My older sister, Savannah, was the undisputed golden child. She was a former teen pageant queen turned luxury lifestyle influencer. She could do no wrong in their eyes. I, on the other hand, was the designated scapegoat. I wasn't rebellious, I just didn't care for country club galas or business degrees. I liked getting my hands dirty in the workshop, building machinery and writing automation code. To them, my lack of polish was an unforgivable embarrassment. The favoritism wasn't subtle. For her 21st birthday, Savannah was gifted a fully furnished luxury apartment downtown. Meanwhile, I was permanently exiled at 19 because I refused to enlist in the political internship my mother had forced upon me. The night they threw me out, I had nothing but a rusty toolbox and an old motorcycle. I spent my first week sleeping on a cot in my friend's garage. The only human being who saw any worth in me was my paternal grandfather, Winston. He was a veteran mechanical engineer who had built his empire from nothing. He didn't care if I wore oil-stained t-shirts or lacked a silver tongue. He saw my potential. He taught me how to read complex blueprints, lent me the initial capital to start my own small repair shop, and let me crash on his couch whenever things got unbearable. He always used to tell me, "Julian, steel doesn't lie. Don't let fake people bend you to fit their mold." He saw the tension. He knew what my parents were doing, even though I was too proud to tell him the full extent of the abuse. Over the years, he became more of a father to me than Richard ever was.
My grandfather passed away after a brutal bout with illness. The news tore my heart wide open. At the funeral, the contrast between us couldn't have been starker. Savannah was preoccupied with subtly live-streaming her performative grief to her followers, while my parents were busy shaking hands with potential business partners, networking over a casket. I just stood in the shadows, staring at the soil, smoking a cigarette in silence. Losing Winston felt like losing the only real anchor I had left in this world. A few weeks later, I received a formal summons from one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. I put on my cleanest button-down shirt, fully convinced I was being called in to receive some sentimental tokens, perhaps his vintage watch collection or a few of his old engineering tools. When I stepped into the oak-paneled conference room, the air instantly turned to ice. My parents and Savannah were already seated, practically dripping in designer labels, laughing softly amongst themselves. My mother gave me a brief, dismissive nod, while Savannah overtly checked her watch, rolling her eyes as if my presence was an inconvenience to her busy schedule. I forced myself into an empty chair at the far end of the table, keeping my distance. The family lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and shuffled the stack of documents. The room fell dead silent. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Per the explicit and final wishes of the late Mr. Winston Montgomery, his entire estate, including $5.2 million in liquid assets, the intellectual property rights to his industrial patents, and the beachfront estate, is hereby left solely to his grandson, Julian Montgomery. Time completely stopped. I swear I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. Savannah's manicured hand jerked, dropping her crystal water glass onto the table. It shattered, water pooling across the expensive mahogany wood, but nobody looked at it. My father's face instantly turned a violent shade of crimson, the veins in his neck bulging as he stared at the lawyer in absolute disbelief. My mother's practiced political smile froze so hard it looked like plastic cracking. I sat there, utterly paralyzed. For a split second, I imagined my grandfather's trademark smirk in my mind, realizing that the old man hadn't just loved me, he had been planning this ultimate chess move all along.
My mother was the first to recover from the shock. Within seconds, her frozen expression melted back into her practiced, public-facing smile. She leaned across the table, her voice dropping into a sweet maternal coo that made my skin crawl. "Well, that actually makes perfect sense," she said, clapping her hands together lightly. "Julian was always so attentive to his grandfather. But naturally, sweetheart, you will need our guidance. An estate of this magnitude is incredibly complex. You have absolutely no experience with corporate taxes or wealth management. Your father and I will set up a family trust tomorrow to handle everything for you." My father leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, his eyes narrowing like a loan shark calculating interest. "Your mother is right, Julian. $5.2 million plus patents. It's a massive burden for someone who works with their hands. Without proper administration, a windfall like this will ruin you. It's only logical that I take over the financial steering wheel." Savannah tucked her hair behind her ear, a smug, condescending smirk returning to her face. "Honestly, Julian, don't take it the wrong way, but you've never been good with the big picture. You still live in a rented garage apartment. Let Dad handle the assets, and we can put you on a very generous monthly allowance. You won't have to worry about a thing." They spoke as if the money was already theirs, completely ignoring the lawyer's presence. They didn't see a grieving grandson. They saw a minor speed bump between them and a fortune. I looked at the three of them, feeling a cold detachment wash over me. "No, thank you," I said flatly, standing up from my chair. "I can manage my own life, and I can manage my grandfather's estate." Before they could protest, I walked out. But they weren't giving up that easily. At around 9 p.m. that very evening, a sleek Porsche pulled up outside my workshop. Savannah stepped out, her designer heels clicking loudly on the oil-stained concrete. She slipped past me without asking, looking around my small office with an exaggerated grimace. "Cute little hobby shop, Julian," she said, tossing her luxury handbag onto my desk. "But let's be real, this stubborn act needs to stop. Beaumet are furious, but I'm here to give you a lifeline. Sign over 50% of the patent rights to me. In exchange, I'll use my PR connections to rebrand you as a tech entrepreneur. We can turn Grandpa's legacy into a real lifestyle brand. Just don't be an idiot." "Get out, Savannah," I pointed toward the door.
Her smile vanished, replaced by a cold, venomous glare. "You think you're smart, Julian? You're a grease monkey. Without us, you'll drown." When they realized they couldn't bribe or sweet-talk me, the gloves came off. The manipulation stopped and the active sabotage began. A week after the will reading, I received a frantic call from my bank. My grandfather's trust account had been temporarily frozen. Someone had submitted a formal dispute claiming that I was mentally unstable, suffering from severe cognitive impairment, and being financially exploited by outside forces. The documentation had been signed by my parents, attempting to initiate an emergency financial freeze. Fortunately, my grandfather's ironclad clauses triggered an automatic security flag, but the bureaucratic red tape still tied up my funds. Then came the physical harassment. My workshop, which had run smoothly for years, suddenly became the target of anonymous city complaints. Within 4 days, I had code enforcement, fire marshals, and environmental inspectors showing up at my door, citing vague, anonymous tips about safety violations. The boiling point happened on a rainy Thursday night. I walked out of the shop at midnight to find my delivery truck destroyed. The windshield was smashed to pieces with a brick, and all 4 tires had been viciously slashed. It wasn't a random act of vandalism, it was a targeted message. But the most toxic blow was the slander. My mother used every ounce of her political clout and social circle to assassinate my character. She began weeping at charity galas and country club lunches, whispering into the ears of the town's elite about her troubled, greedy son. She spun a narrative that I had cut the family off, manipulated a dying, senile old man, and essentially stole the family fortune. Soon the rumors trickled down. Longtime clients from the wealthy side of town started canceling their repair contracts with my shop. People I had known for years looked at me with disgust when I ran errands. The local diner owner, who used to joke with me every morning, threw my change onto the counter without looking at me. I hit rock bottom. I sat at my desk in the dark workshop, surrounded by broken glass and mounting bills, staring at the frozen bank notices. The isolation was suffocating. For a fleeting moment, the old doubts my parents had spent 18 years beating into my head came rushing back. Maybe they were right. Maybe I am just a failure. Maybe I should just sign the papers and let them take it all. I slumped over my desk, completely broken, wondering if I had the strength to survive the upcoming week.
In the absolute depths of that dark night, I began cleaning up my office, throwing away the shattered glass from the vandalism. As I pulled out a bottom drawer to wipe down the desk, a small polished wooden box fell out. It was a box my grandfather had given me months before he passed, telling me to keep it hidden. The impact broke the false bottom of the box, revealing an encrypted USB drive and a handwritten sticky note. "Julian," it read in his shaky but firm handwriting, "when you find this, the hyenas will be circling. Do not bow your head. Steel is forged in the hottest fires." My heart racing, I plugged the USB into my computer. A video file popped up. It was a recording of my grandfather sitting in his favorite armchair, dated just 6 weeks before his death. He looked directly into the camera, completely lucid, and articulated exactly why he was disinheriting his son and daughter-in-law, citing their greed and toxic vanity. He explicitly stated that I was his sole chosen heir. Watching that video, something snapped inside me. The paralyzing self-doubt vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. I was done playing the victim. The next morning, I went on the offensive, but I did it in total silence. I didn't yell, I didn't confront them, and I didn't reply to Savannah's mocking text messages. Instead, I hired Elena, a high-stakes asset manager known for being absolutely ruthless and fiercely protective of her clients. Together, we quietly began building an airtight fortress. I handed her the bank's fraud report regarding my parents' attempt to freeze my funds. I pulled the security camera footage from the night my truck was vandalized, which clearly caught a vehicle registered to my father's real estate company scouting my shop. I hired a private investigator to document every single slanderous lie my mother was spreading at her political functions. While my parents thought they were successfully crushing me into submission, I used a fraction of my personal savings to quietly expand. I secured a lease on a massive, state-of-the-art industrial facility on the outskirts of the city, transitioning my business into a high-end automation firm. For months, I walked a brutal tightrope. I let my parents believe their petty sabotage was working. I smiled politely when people sneered at me in public. But beneath the surface, I was transforming into the most formidable, prepared person in any room. I was no longer reacting to their moves. I was actively setting the chessboard. Elena soon introduced me to Marcus Thorne, a legendary, razor-sharp attorney who had handled my grandfather's corporate legal matters for 30 years. Marcus was a towering man with piercing gray eyes, and when I laid out the evidence of my family's harassment, a slow, predatory smile spread across his face.
"Your grandfather was an exceptionally brilliant man, Julian," Marcus said, leaning across his massive desk. "He didn't just leave you a fortune, he left you a bear trap, and your parents are about to step right into it." Marcus pulled up the master copy of the trust documents and pointed out a hidden, devastating clause, a poison pill, engineered specifically for this scenario. My grandfather had quietly set up a substantial, multi-million-dollar corporate subsidy that funded the debt-heavy real estate projects of my father's company. However, the clause explicitly stated that if any biological family member attempted to legally contest the will or interfere with my executive control, that subsidy would instantly collapse. Not only would they be cut off entirely, but they would also be legally forced to repay the outstanding corporate loans immediately. "They have no idea this exists," Marcus chuckled darkly. "Winston kept it entirely separate from his personal will. They think they're fighting a scared kid. They don't realize they are playing with dynamite." Meanwhile, my parents grew increasingly arrogant, mistaking my silence for total defeat. Formally typed letters from my father's corporate attorneys began arriving at my shop weekly. They were restructuring proposals, aggressively demanding that I appoint Savannah as the chief public relations officer of the industrial patents, and that I funnel 50% of the liquid assets into a trusted family offshore account to mitigate tax risks. I didn't decline, and I didn't agree. On Marcus's advice, I simply filed every single letter into a secured folder. "Let them write," Marcus had told me. "Every demand they put in writing is another inch of rope they are tying around their own necks." Meanwhile, my quiet expansion paid off. My new automation firm officially launched, securing 3 massive manufacturing contracts with major tech companies. Suddenly, my name wasn't just being whispered in country club gossip, it was being printed in regional business journals. The false narrative my mother had built was beginning to crack. People in the industry were starting to realize that I wasn't a reckless grease monkey, I was Winston Montgomery's rightful successor. The stage was set, the trap was baited, and I was holding the winning hand. I just had to wait for them to make their final, fatal move. The fatal move came exactly as Marcus predicted. Blinded by greed and furious at my sudden business success, my parents went for the juggernaut option. On a brisk Tuesday morning, I was served with an emergency court petition. Richard and Evelyn were suing for total conservatorship over me, publicly claiming I was mentally incompetent, suffering from severe emotional distress, and unable to manage a multi-million-dollar estate.
They wanted to strip me of my basic rights and cage me financially, just like they had caged me emotionally my entire childhood. The courtroom was deafeningly quiet on the morning of the hearing. My parents and Savannah arrived looking like royalty, flanked by a high-priced legal team. My mother wore an elegant black dress, putting on a masterful performance for the gallery, dabbing fake tears from her eyes as if she were a heartbroken mother forced into this tragic situation. Savannah smirked at me from across the aisle, mouthing the words, "It's over." Their lead attorney stood up and delivered a scathing opening statement. He painted me as a volatile dropout, an unstable mechanic prone to financial recklessness and completely unequipped to handle industrial patents. He argued that for my own safety, control must be transferred to a responsible corporate entity, conveniently owned by my father. When it was our turn, Marcus Thorne rose slowly, adjusting his suit jacket. His presence completely commanded the room. "Your Honor, this petition has absolutely nothing to do with mental competence," Marcus began, his voice echoing like thunder. "It is a desperate, criminal attempt at extortion, driven by pure corporate greed." With surgical precision, Marcus began dropping our bombs. First, he presented the forensic tech report proving my parents had tried to fraudulently freeze my accounts. Then he submitted the security footage linking my father's corporate vehicle to the vandalism at my shop. Then he entered the private investigators' recordings of my mother's defamatory statements. But the absolute death blow came when Marcus played the video from the hidden USB drive. My grandfather's voice filled the courtroom, crystal clear and utterly undeniable. "I am leaving everything to Julian because his father, Richard, is a financial fraud and his mother, Evelyn, is a parasite. If they ever attempt to contest this, let this video serve as absolute proof of their malice."
The gallery gasped, my mother's face drained of all color. My father slammed his fists on the table, his face turning a dark, furious purple. Savannah looked like she was about to vomit. Marcus didn't stop. He formally triggered the poison pill clause, presenting the debt recapture mandate to the judge. The judge didn't even retire to her chambers to deliberate. She slammed her gavel down with furious force. Petition denied with prejudice. The court finds zero basis for this claim. Furthermore, I am forwarding these files to the district attorney for immediate criminal investigation into fraud, harassment, and perjury. This matter is adjourned.
The fallout from that courtroom defeat was an absolute, unmitigated nuclear strike on my family's empire. The dominoes began falling before we even left the courthouse parking lot. Because the judge forwarded the case files to the district attorney, the local news picked up the story within hours. The headline, "City Councilwoman and Prominent Developer Accused of Fraud and Perjury in Millionaire Will Dispute," spread like wildfire. My mother's political career died that very afternoon. The city council called an emergency closed-door meeting, stripping her of her committees and forcing her into a humiliating public resignation by the end of the week. Her elite country club friends dropped her instantly. She went from the queen of local high society to a social pariah overnight. My father fared even worse. Marcus Thorne had officially executed the poison pill clause. With his credit line suddenly severed and the estate's multi-million-dollar corporate loan recapture triggered, his heavily leveraged real estate company imploded. Within 2 months, his primary investors backed out, his ongoing projects were frozen, and his firm was forced into involuntary bankruptcy. And Savannah? Her luxury lifestyle brand collapsed under the weight of the scandal. Her corporate sponsors pulled their contracts to avoid being associated with an influencer who had actively tried to help extort her own brother. Deprived of her trust fund and her online income, she had to sell her central luxury apartment to settle her credit card debts, moving back into our parents' house in utter disgrace. Meanwhile, my life soared. My automation firm became one of the fastest-growing enterprises in the state. I didn't use my grandfather's wealth to buy sports cars or mansions to flaunt them in their faces. I invested it back into my workforce and funded local trade schools in Winston's name, honoring his true legacy. 6 months after the trial, I drove my new truck past my parents' suburban estate. The gates were rusted, the manicured lawn was overgrown with weeds, and a massive bright red foreclosure sign was hammered into the dirt. The house that had once been my prison, the place where they had called me a parasite and thrown me out into the cold, looked completely hollow. I parked across the street for a brief moment, watching the house. I saw Savannah on the overgrown porch, smoking a cigarette, looking miserable and worn out. She caught sight of my truck and froze, staring at me. I didn't roll down the window to mock her. I didn't smirk. I felt absolutely no anger, no malice, and no hatred. Looking at them, I realized my revenge was truly complete because I no longer needed their validation. Their power over my mind was entirely gone. I shifted the truck into gear, looked out at the open road ahead, and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since I was 19 years old. Grandfather was right. Steel is forged in the fire. I stepped on the gas and left them and the wreckage of their vanity forever in my rearview mirror.